What's in my pockets? Chuquicamata. Located in the Atacama Desert, it is the world's largest open-pit copper mine and has been at the center of Chile's mining industry for over 100 years. It was first developed at the turn of the 20th century, when American businessmen began laying claim to most of the Chilean mining landscape. One such group of men was the Guggenheims. They purchased and industrialized Chuquicamata in the early 1920s, going on to develop copper mines at El Teniente, El Salvador, and other locations throughout Chile. By World War II, through their holdings in the US-based Kennecott and Anaconda mining corporations, the Guggenheim family controlled roughly 80% of Chile's mining industry and 80% of the world's copper supply. They also possessed a vast global network of silver, lead, and diamond mines. America's demand for copper during wartime had cemented their control of the industry. Chilean copper would help to make the Guggenheim family billionaires, affording them a life of luxury through which they practiced philanthropy and art collecting. Solomon Guggenheim would become one of the first great American modern art collectors. His namesake museum, the Guggenheim, was founded in 1939 and has been central to the development of American modern art throughout the 20th century. His niece, Peggy, would use her inheritance to do the same in Europe, funding modern avant-garde artists such as Man Ray and Marcel Duchamp. She would go on to become the most famous art collector of the 20th century. Over time, the copper that the Guggenheim family extracted from Chuquicamata found its way into the pockets of American and European artists. In the post-war era, Chile's copper industry flourished, yet many began to feel that the gains were imbalanced. While Chilean miners experienced poor working conditions and low pay, American businessmen became richer. With the advent of the Cold War, socioeconomic tensions in the region became increasingly conflictual. In a polarized political climate, resentment of foreign ownership in Chile began to take hold. When Salvador Allende became president of Chile in 1971, he was the first and only democratically elected Marxist president in history. One of his first acts was to nationalize the entire Chilean copper industry, confiscating all mines from the hands of foreign ownership. Chuquicamata was one of the first to be taken over. No reimbursement would be offered. American businessmen reacted swiftly, taking their cause to Capitol Hill. In collusion with the Nixon administration and the CIA, they began funding various right-wing resistance efforts throughout the country. Providing covert support to the neo-fascist Fatherland and Liberty Party, they sought to destabilize the Allende government. In 1973, these groups turned their funding efforts towards the Chilean military. Led by General Augusto Pinochet, they began to plan a coup d'etat. On September 11, 1973, under the leadership of General Pinochet, the Chilean military executed a coup and stormed the presidential palace in Santiago. Though the US government condemned the act at the time, it was later revealed that the CIA had sent in teams of covert operatives to assist with planning the coup, and had provided the missiles that were used to attack the palace. The military began by rounding up all left-wing sympathizers and imprisoned them in the Santiago football stadium. Among those interned at the stadium was Chilean folk singer and activist Victor Jara. Recognized by the officers, they took him to the main floor of the stadium and executed him in front of the other prisoners. In the first days of the coup, thousands of left-wing supporters were killed or went missing. The attack on artists and musicians such as Jara was particularly severe. Creative types and intellectuals were targeted for harboring revolutionary sentiments, and waves of musicians and artists were forced to flee the country. Many who didn't flee were imprisoned or went missing. In the months that followed, Pinochet launched the Caravan of Death, a military operation whereby a small group of officials flew by helicopter up and down Chile from prison to prison, executing socialist supporters by firing squad. To protest these events, female folk artists began quilting arpoleras, a type of narrative tapestry that depicted the violence and torture that they were experiencing. These artworks had to be smuggled out of Chile, as these women were also hunted down by the military. Chile's first international art museum, Museo de la Solidaridad, a public initiative that had been launched by the Allende government in 1971, was shut down. The museum was designed to be a hub for the arts in South America. Spanish surrealist painter Juan Miró had designed the logo, and the museum was building a strong collection of modern and contemporary art, including donated works by Miró, Oswaldo Guayasamín, Roberto Mata, and hundreds of other international and South American artists. Its collection was confiscated by the military and remains missing to this day. Prior to the coup, in 1971, conceptual artist Hans Hock had been planning his first American solo exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum, but he ruffled feathers with works that pointed to the business makeup of the Guggenheim, exploring where the institution's funding came from and its board members' corporate holdings. They refused to display it, and the exhibit was canceled. However, the experience sparked a critical fire for Hock. After the coup, he pushed his inquiries further, and in 1974 unveiled perhaps his most controversial work. Titled Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, Board of Trustees, it consisted of 7 panels that outlined the business profiles of the Guggenheim board members. The work demonstrated connections among the Guggenheim, the Kennecott Copper Corporation, and the U.S. government's involvement in Chile. It pointed out that at least 3 Guggenheim board members were key players in Kennecott. After displaying these works, Hock was largely blacklisted by the American art world. Once in power, the Pinochet government reimbursed the foreign businesses that had had their mines confiscated. The Anaconda Corporation, a company half owned by the Guggenheims that had purchased Chuquicamata, received $1.4 billion US for the site. The Kennecott Corporation received the same for the site of El Teniente. Slowly, Western business would return to the Chilean mining landscape. As the Chilean copper industry continued to grow throughout the 20th century, the village at Chuquicamata mine began to die. For over 100 years, it was a community for the miners and their families. Yet with increased production came increased environmental hazards. In 2007, after years of mounting health problems, the Chilean government forced the town to be closed. The air at Chuquicamata is now considered to be toxic. Once a community of 20,000 people, the village of Chuquicamata now sits empty, slowly being swallowed up by mine expansion on one side and the Atacama Desert on the other. At the heart of the town square sits a large sculpture of Pinocchio. As the buildings have crumbled and been taken over by sand, he too is witness to these forces. Yet as he rots, he remains smiling.